Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Indaba Africa. This is Chris. Today's topic is Eskom and what's going on at Eskom. An article appeared today, the 16th of July, 2020, in the South African. And the title of the article is Eskom calls in the German cavalry to help stave off load shedding. Well, what are we talking about here, ladies and gentlemen? In a country that once upon a time, under the previous dispensation, the previous government produced nearly half of all electricity on the entire continent of Africa, has now been beset by decades of an inability to deliver electricity to its citizens. That's right, the state-owned parastatal, which has a monopoly on power generation in South Africa, fails to deliver. In fact, as I sit here and record this video right now, millions of South Africans sit in the dark, vulnerable to thieves, and unable to conduct economic activity as a consequence of Eskom's failures. Well, what are some of the challenges facing Eskom? Let's discuss that and this offer of German assistance. So some of the things confronting Eskom include its generating capacity shortages. In other words, it can't generate enough electricity to meet demand, hence the load shedding, dropping parts of the grid so the electricity demand does not cause a catastrophic failure and shut the entire grid down, so you drop sections of the grid to balance the load. So generating capacity shortages, financial instability, corruption, mismanagement, and not the least of which is 450 billion rand of debt. That's 25 billion US dollars in debt for the state-owned parastatal. Eskom reported a loss of 20.7 billion rand in 2019 financial year, which is just over 1 billion US dollars, and projected a same loss, 20 billion rand for financial year 2020, which we're now in. This is before the National Coronavirus Command Council did anything to further damage South Africa's economy, which is now on life support. In December of 2019, South Africa's Eskom reached load shedding stage 6. Now, what does that mean? Different tiers and thresholds for reducing the number of people who can access the grid. So at stage 6, that means that Eskom lost 40% of its generating capacity. South Africa's total electrical generating capacity is 51,309 megawatts of power. Now, you never employ all of that simultaneously, but losing 40% of that generating capacity at any given time is a sign of a seriously damaged, weakened player in the electricity market. Now, Eskom continues to struggle to meet demand for power generation, and this is mostly because of maintenance issues, poor management, and the debt. It doesn't have the resources to buy new parts for an antiquated and dilapidated power infrastructure that has allowed over 26 years to degrade. At any given time, 1/5 of Eskom's power stations are not even operational. 20% of capacity is offline just because they can't produce electricity. The ancient, dilapidated, and neglected power stations and transmission lines are a major problem for South Africa in power generation. Now, at a time that the African National Congress should have been investing capital into the network for Eskom, it was busy stuffing the company and the board with patronage appointments, permitting theft, and not collecting usage fees from newly connected customers, people who never paid for electricity before. Millions of them wound up on the grid, many of whom never pay for the electricity. Robbed of that revenue from people consuming electricity that it must produce, Eskom has been in an untenable position from that alone. In addition to that, the ANC has been covering up all of the corruption, all of the graft, all of the patronage, and the failures at Eskom for the better part of 2 decades, as it's bailed out the company time and time again. On top of the 450 billion rand in debt, Eskom has gotten tens of billions of rand from the South African government to tide it over. Now, what have they done to improve things? Well, Eskom in 2007 started construction on 2 major coal-fired power stations, one of which would be the 4th largest on the planet. And those coal-fired power stations are the Medupe and the Kusile stations. Now, the problem is that they were expected to be completed in 2015 at a total capital cost of 162.3 billion rand, or $9 billion. But here it is 2020, and neither station is complete and fully operational. Although this year they promised that the Medupe station will be fully operational in 2020. That promise was made before COVID-19. Where is it going to go? And beyond that, we're not expecting to see the Kusile station available until 2023, another 3 years before that station is completed. That's almost 2 decades after the thing was started. Seriously? Absolutely insane. This is what happens with corrupt state-run enterprises that don't exist for profit. A for-profit company would have gone out of business if it failed to produce a revenue-generating facility in 2 decades. That's absolutely insane. Now, I mentioned that in 2007, they were supposed to cost the state treasury 163.2 billion rand, or $9 billion. The actual cost now, and we're still 3 years for completion of the Kusile power station, let alone the Medupe, which is supposed to be done this year, the cost now is estimated at 451 billion rand, or $25 billion. 2.5 times what the original cost was supposed to be. In late June of this year, 2020, the power station that I'm talking about, the Medupe station, which is supposed to go up, the Deputy President of South Africa, David Mabuza, said the following: Eskom has to deal with cost overruns and defects affecting Kusile and Medupe power stations. You think we know that? We are advised by the leadership of Eskom that a great deal of progress has been made in effecting corrective technical modifications which are required at Kusile and Medupe. Deputy President David Mabuza. Well, thank you so much for that update for power stations that were supposed to be fully operational 5 years ago and are yet to be fully operational. Now, these two stations are not a panacea. They won't solve all of South Africa's power generation problems, despite the fact that the Medupe station will be the fourth largest coal-fired power plant on the planet. South Africa's growing electricity demand will continue to impinge on the rest of the dilapidated, ancient coal-fired power stations that are not generating enough power for South Africa today. So what is the ANC's solution to the embarrassment that is Eskom, this major break on economic development? While the president sits around and tells fairy tales about the South African economy being colonialist and racist, of course, that's the same economy he profited to the tune of $450 million personal fortune from. Never mind that small distraction. While he says that about South Africa's economy, he fails to mention the fact that people cannot get reliable, safe, and consistent access to electricity, which damages economic growth in a far greater fashion than any degree of racism ever could, assuming there was any racism involved in the economy. The ANC solutions to the embarrassment of Eskom are, number one, to split the state-owned parastatal into 3 separate entities for generation, transmission, and distribution of power, the 3 functions. Now, of course, all 3 of those entities will be owned by the state, so they will remain parastatals, which, of course, is the proximate cause for why there's such a mess in the first place, why there's been underinvestment, why there's been theft, why there's been mismanagement, and why there's been racialization of employment policies, which have driven hundreds of qualified white South African technicians and engineers out of the company and forced them to move abroad to make a living, including places like France, where you find several hundred South African engineers and technicians who worked in the industry, electricity generation in South Africa, now work in France. In addition to that, young South Africans who managed to get into university despite having to have higher qualification standards than their black peers get through university, graduate with qualifications as engineers and technicians, and are denied employment by Eskom in its racialization of South Africa's employment. So their goal is to split the company into 3 entities still controlled by the state. In addition, Eskom has repeatedly issued fantastical plans for how it's going to diversify its power generation. 75% of power is generated in South Africa to this day by coal-fired power stations. In an effort to reduce carbon emissions, they have wanted to move away from that, but they've failed to do so. So split the company into 3 entities still owned by the state, which doesn't fix the problem of the state, and it creates new problems because now the 3 generation, transmission, distribution entities will be effectively working for themselves. If you make a distribution grid network and it doesn't get the power from the generation guys, it's going to fail. So how is this going to work? It's not. Split the company in 3, issue fantastical plans which never come to fruition, and then call in the German reserves. Now, this is an interesting development given the government's racial policies, as I said, have forced hundreds of white engineers and technicians out of work and prevented hundreds more young, qualified minority South Africans from gaining work at the parastatal. So while they're busy denying South African citizens employment opportunities for which they're qualified, they'll happily bring in people of a similar skin hue and light pigmentation to do the work in South Africa. Seriously? Seriously. Let's talk about the Germans. What exactly are the Germans doing? Well, it appears that they are helping German-owned businesses, or are they really augmenting Eskom? It's really difficult to tell from the news reporting on the South African and other sources came up on this. This seems to be a lot more about shoring up German-owned businesses in South Africa than it is about helping Eskom. And let me talk about this very quickly. So the German ambassador to Pretoria, Martin Schäfer, said the following. The experts of German companies operating in South Africa will hopefully make their valuable contributions to kickstart the South African economy and reignite exports of high-tech products proudly made in South Africa. Wow, that's interesting. So they're there to kickstart the economy, not fix Eskom's woes, stop the load shedding. He further went on to say it's great to be back in South Africa because he just returned to South Africa. And even better to have a crowd of German engineers, technicians, and experts on board Lufthansa 572 this morning in Joburg. That's 572 is the flight. They will kickstart the SA economy, boost exports made in South Africa, and assist Eskom. Hashtag we are in this together. Yes, well, thank you, Ambassador Schaefer from the Deutsche Botschaft there in Pretoria. Really appreciate that feedback. But Tim Abbott from BMW South Africa, Bavarian Motor Works, based in South Africa, says we're confident that this will help to get the economy back on its feet as fast as possible, and in the long term, that will help protect jobs. Tim Abbott, CEO, BMW South Africa. Now, the problem with this is that this approach completely ignores the reasons why South Africa's economy is in the rubbish bin in the first place. The problem is not new, and it's not pandemic-induced. The problem is ANC macroeconomic policies. The policies of the ruling African National Congress are what are bankrupting and beggaring South Africans. Black economic empowerment, racial discrimination in employment and government tenders. Expropriation without compensation, the prospect that the government will take your property, physical and financial, without any compensation on a whim. This is damaging foreign direct investment and confidence in the economy and undermining property ownership. Plus, cultivating a culture of dependence on the state with 17 million South Africans subsisting solely off of grants, rather than building a culture of entrepreneurialism, racial discrimination, access to higher education, government jobs, and government tenders, and the mismanagement of state-owned enterprises that crowd out the private sector, stagnating job growth, GDP growth, and prolonging wealth disparity. These are the woes afflicting South Africa's economy. And in that, of course, is the Eskom debacle. Eskom not providing reliable, safe, consistent supply of electricity to meet demand, and instead dumping parts of the network through pervasive and extended load shedding periods which harm the country. The ANC's own policies are the problem. Now, interestingly enough, in February of this year, Chancellor Angela Merkel went to South Africa, and she had a few things to say about South Africa's electricity generating sector. So let's see what she had to say. When she visited in February 2020, she offered advice that seemed more like Donald Trump than this faux CDU conservative. She's not a conservative, although she's in the CDU party in Germany. She's not truly a conservative. So the comments she made puts you more in mind of something that Donald Trump would say, but not the supposedly erudite Angela Merkel. Now, she had advice on advising how to diversify the energy source of electricity, but not on the most pressing issue confronting South Africa, safe, reliable delivery of electricity. So her advice was the following. I understand that about 80 or 90% of your electricity is generated through coal power plants. Most of them, I understand, are not really modern. Now, that's all true. That's about 75%, and some of these are 40-year-old power plants or older. She said with its mineral and coal resources, South Africa should be able to benefit from renewable energy. Now, I don't really understand how you benefit from renewable energy when you're talking about coal. That's not a renewable source. She says you have a lot of solar. You have a lot of wind. So you can do a lot there. Now, I could put Donald Trump under that quote, and you would think it came from Donald Trump, not Angela Merkel. You have a lot of solar. You have a lot of wind. So you can do a lot there. Now, I have to say that this is rich coming from the German chancellor. It's very hypocritical of the Germans to push their fantasy of green on everyone else. That's right. Very hypocritical of Merkel to tell South Africa to abandon coal, electricity, and power generation because today, in 2020, 2 decades into the 21st century, Germany remains the world's largest consumer and producer of lignite or brown coal, one of the most dirty sources of pollution for energy generation on the planet. 25% of the so-called green Germany, 25% of its electricity continues to be produced by lignite today. Yet Angela Merkel deigns to lecture to South Africans that they should abandon coal in favor of solar and wind. While 25% of electricity in her country comes from one of the worst polluting sources, far worse than bituminous coal, lignite. It's hard to believe. Ladies and gentlemen, this news story about German engineers coming to South Africa to help stop load shedding seems to me to be little more than a press release from the Deutsche Botschaft, or the German embassy. It seems to be about something that the German government is interested in doing to shore up German-owned business like BMW and other German businesses in South Africa, and far less to do about the electrical situation in South Africa. And if it's truly about fixing Eskom, then why aren't you fixing Eskom with qualified South Africans? Why are you turning to the Germans? What is this all about? There are a lot of people who think that there's a conspiracy between the Chinese Communist Party in Beijing and the African National Congress. And this is an example, I tell you, that it has a lot less to do with that fellow traveler mindset than the fact that the African National Congress is completely inept and has no idea what they're doing. Eskom should have been sold off. And I know that I run in opposition with many South Africans, even conservative South Africans, who disagree with me. That's okay. We can have discourse on this. But it is proven under this government's control, it is simply a patronage machine, a source of wealth for cadres and to pilfer from, a place to park political cadres so they don't interfere with the political process, and for a business that is run not as a business, but as a patronage machine. That's what Eskom is. It's not in the business of delivering electricity to South Africans. That's just an outcrop of its mission. That's what its job was once upon a time, but today exists for the benefit of the African National Congress. And that is sad, ladies and gentlemen. That is truly, truly sad. That is not the purpose of it. In a country that has nearly 52,000 megawatts of power generation for just 58 million people, this should not be an issue. But it is an issue. And why is it an issue? Because of the way the African National Congress has managed the state-run, state-owned parastatal. And that's the challenge. So, ladies and gentlemen, the German cavalry is not coming to the rescue in South Africa. And if it is, it's shameful, and shame on the ANC and Eskom for hiring other people to do it. You can't fall back on the old broken excuse that we need to hire Africans to do it, because you're not hiring Africans. You're bringing in white Germans to do this when you have Africans and white South Africans who could do the job just as well, if not better, who actually know the power system in South Africa and know the country. Ladies and gentlemen, if you found this video interesting or thought-provoking, I ask you to consider subscribing to my channel by smashing that subscription button right down there. Be sure to toggle that bell icon, because that'll give you updates of when I do live stream videos, prepared videos, and special guest features on Chris Wide Africa. Now, I ask you to push the bell icon because I've noticed a drop. It used to be about 30% of my subscribers did that. Now we're down to around 20%, and people are frequently complaining they're not being updated about videos. Well, you won't get updated if you don't push that bell icon. Feel free to leave comments. I try to read all comments on the channel for my videos. And finally, I ask that you smash the like button. And if you don't want to smash it because you don't want to break it, just tap on it. Give the video a like. The more likes as a percentage of the video viewed, the more likely it is will be presented on other people's streams. So thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate your patronage. God bless, and have a good day.